Hello,
Hello,
hello.
hello. Welcome.
Are we welcome? Are we having fun yet?
Right. Welcome to Flutter Apprentice Book Club.
Here we go. Volume 2 or 3 or something. There's going to be a lot of them. So hey, we're going to try to get to it fairly quickly this time. We kind of did drag on last time before we got to the code, which, hey, that's what everybody's here for anyway, right?
Always.
So let's just go over a couple of things real quick. First and foremost, of course, is the code of conduct, the do's and don'ts. Be nice, be respectful, be constructive. Yes, it's YouTube comments. Be constructive anyway. Don't post anything that's adult content, rude, offensive. Don't advertise, promote your services. We know that you're probably, looking for work or something like that, but please don't advertise it. Don't ask the same questions over and over and over again. If we see your question show up in the chat twice on the screen at the same time, you're probably never going to get it answered. It's a good way to get ignored. We do see the questions. We get a lot of questions. We've had a lot of questions asked before we even came on. So we need to get to those too. Harassment of any kind is not tolerated. That includes things such as bigotry, misogyny, incel, all of that nonsense. And one of the things to remember is that we share ban lists. In the Flutter community, it's a little different than in most places. If you get kicked from here, you're going to get kicked on the Slack. You're going to get kicked in other places as well, because we all do share those lists. We don't wait for people to do an offense once in each place. It's just, if you're bad enough to get kicked in one, then nobody else wants you around. That said, and hey, that's what keeps it a fun, friendly place, right?
Indeed.
So we are also...
This episode is Widgets. Welcome.
Widgets.
We're going to talk lots about widgets.
And one other thing, though, just make sure you stay around. We have an overview of all the various resources that the Flutter community's got for you. Okay, we're talking about articles. We're talking about chat. We're talking about support. We're talking about all kinds of things. So don't go anywhere. And what was that about questions, Simon? A way for us to actually find questions?
Yes. If you're going to enter questions, please make sure you put like a letter Q or a question emoji just before the message, and we can help us identify them so we get your question answered.
Yes, Q, a question mark, a question emoji, something, because there are a lot of comments flying by. With that said, let's have a chat with some people here. I do believe we have Danielle coming up. And then we also have Stef.
Hi.
And
hey, Steph.
Let's see here. Sarah, do we get Sarah for at least a little while?
I think we're supposed to get Sarah. Absolutely.
Hi, Sarah.
Hi.
And normally I'd have my co-host Esra up here with me, but she's not available this week. But we look forward to having her back next week.
True. Very true. So.
Oh, and we would have Vincent, the author for the chapters that we're covering, but he is in Da Nang and sleeping.
Well, we do have that we do have that fake Vincent that he sent in his place.
We do have a fake Vincent.
Shall we? Yes. Here comes fake Vincent.
Hi everyone, my name is Vincent and I'm one of the authors on the Flutter Apprentice book. I'm currently based out of Da Nang, Vietnam, working on a startup where we build on-demand transport and delivery apps. Especially with a startup, everything is about speed and time to market, and we use Flutter to build internal tools and implement new features quickly on top of our existing iOS and Android apps. Fun fact about myself, I started my journey as an iOS developer, and before working on this book, I knew nothing about Flutter. So in a way, this is a reflection of some of the experiences and things I've learned along the way, which I hope you guys will find useful. I hope everyone enjoys reading and learning as much as we did writing this book. Special thanks to the Flutter team at Google, the Flutter community channel, and my team at ray1look.com. Thanks, everyone.
And
Thank you,
thank you,
Vincent.
Vincent, even though you're
Yes.
snoring right now.
Yes.
And we hope
So-
you're resting well. Absolutely. And by the way, just for fun, my my dear friend of almost 30 years, Christine, is watching, so I wanted to say hi to her.
Hello.
Cool.
Hello.
Yes.
Hi, Mom.
That's Christine with a K. So anyway.
You know, I'm looking around here and the screen feels kind of crowded. What do you think?
We'll say goodbye for now, and we'll leave it
yes.
to you guys to
Simon
take it
and I
away.
will be back to field questions and help everybody out. But for right now, as far as the book club is concerned, we're just in the way.
See you guys
See you
later.
soon.
See ya.
Thanks. Bye.
All right. I went too. What happened to me? I was gonna say I disappeared for a second. All right. Can someone share the slides I've got going?
Yes.
All right, perfect. Okay, so here's what we're here for today is the Flutter Apprentice Book Club, as you know, and this is the second episode of 10, right, Sarah?
Correct.
All right, and we are covering chapters 3 and 4, which both have to do with widgets. And since people often simplify Flutter down to everything's a widget, that's a great place to get going. And we're going to have more coding from Craig, and that's going to be great for that. Okay, let's go ahead and say a quick, bring up the people here that we've got. We've got Vincent, you already saw the video from. And we have Stef, who is not only my co-host today, she was the technical editor on this great book and has all kinds of excitement about it. You've already met Simon and Scott. Craig's going to be coming on in a few minutes, and Sarah's on here too, and she's the one that's kind of helping run this book club for us, and so it's great to have her on screen with us. And
Thank you.
all right, I think you can take the slides off now if you like.
Alrighty.
All right.
Who is next? Are we starting with Craig now?
Oh,
no.
well,
It's my turn.
right.
Okay. Cool. So I have some resources to share with everybody. So here we go. The learning journey can be a bit frustrating sometimes. And so if you get stuck, there are a lot of people that are happy to help you. We often say that the community is the crown jewel of the Flutter ecosystem because it's just full of so many passionate, kind, helpful people that just want to help newcomers to get up to speed and get over whatever bumps they have. So if you're just starting out with Flutter, and I guess you are because you're in this book club, here are some places you can turn to when you get stuck, because everybody gets stuck. So first of all, there are a lot of meetups around the world that are dedicated to Flutter. This is actually out of date. There are now 110. They're all over the world, and there's a link to them in the show notes. And basically, these meetups are just full of people that are enthusiastic about Flutter. They probably have a little bit of experience. If you join, I'm sure they would be happy to help. A lot of them have been encouraged to follow along with the book club, so they might even be reading chapters 3 and 4 this week as well. I should add that in Corona times, the meetup community really, and everyone, of course, stepped up to doing things digitally. So even if there is not a meetup specifically in your region, there are often communities that are sharing their events online and have Slack groups and all kinds of ways to connect with them. So if there's no meetup in your area and you don't feel like starting one yourself, then maybe you can connect with one in your area. And then in addition to the meetup network, there are many online resources. There is, of course, the Ray Wenderlich Book Forum. So if you're reading this book, there's a forum you have access to specifically for the readers. So that's a great place to go to find other people at the same place on their journey. And then more generally, there is Stack Overflow. There's a lot of really good basic questions already answered there, and you can ask new questions as well. Nice people there to answer. And there is the Flutter Dev Reddit. Lots of good discussions there too. And similarly, there's the Flutter Community Slack and the Flutter Discord. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, for today at least, there's here, because Hump Day Q&A is at the end of the day, a place where you can ask questions about Flutter. So you have lots of places to go if you get stuck, and I hope that you'll try a little bit before you go to ask questions, but you should know that these are here because it's not good to, bang your head on something for too long. So just keep these in mind. There's links to everything here in the show notes, so you don't have to worry about scrambling to write all this stuff down. Okay, that's it for me. Oh,
Those are some great resources, Sarah.
thanks. I hope people will take advantage of them. So I think now it's time to dive into the book, right? So I'm going to add Craig, who is...
Take all of us away. Absolutely.
Okay, there's Craig, and he has his slides. And I'm going to say goodbye, and I'll remove everyone.
For a while. We'll be back. We'll be back after this section on chapter 3.
Hey, everybody. As I said, just like last week, my name is Craig Labenz, and I'm on the Flutter DevRel team, and which is short for Developer Relations. And I am here to talk to you about chapters 3 and 4. So let's get into it. I need to get my controls up. Here we go. Okay. So if you've read chapter 3, great. This kind of lineup of topics will seem familiar to you. If not, this is going to be a little bit of a spoiler for chapter 3, but then maybe when you are able to get back and read it, having heard us talk about these things will hopefully make everything make a ton of sense. So we're going to be hitting some architecture stuff. We're going to talk about different layers within the app, material, Cupertino, widgets underneath. And we've got a couple code breaks in here when we get to the theme data, when we start to style our app. And then we'll look at some wireframes. We're going to code up some cards. That was a really fun part of the chapter, I thought. And then we're going to wrap things up and ultimately have an AMA. Okay. So first of all, last week, if you remember, Flutter is a bunch of layers, right? And it's actually like layers of layers, right? So it's an onion of onions or a cake of cakes. Hopefully not a cake of onions. So that would be pretty gross. But that top layer, the framework layer, is what we deal with the most. And that's where you write all your Dart code. The engine and the embedder, they're there and they're extremely important, but the average Flutter developer doesn't have to worry about those too often. But then within that framework layer, there are other layers. And the top two, again, within the framework layer, the material and Cupertino, that top spot, and then below that widgets, that's where we spend most of our time. And you can start to style your app in one way or the other. One of the first decisions that you can make, especially if you are thinking about mobile first, if you're targeting every single platform out there, which Flutter can do, then the old material Cupertino dichotomy is maybe a little less important to think about. But if you're making a mobile app, one of the first things that you can think about, or a question that you can answer is, do I want to start with material themes, or do I want to start with Cupertino styles? And Cupertino, of course, is iOS's style guide, and material is Google's style guide for Android. And it's best to pick one of these and then start to tinker with it as you go. Some things will adapt. And we can see here on the screen, we've got an alert dialog. And if you use an Android phone primarily, then you're used to seeing what's on the left. If you use an iPhone and iOS, you're used to seeing what's on the right. And it would only make sense that for things like this, you always keep your users seeing what they're used to. But in general, some things will adapt, and then others you just kind of want to pick one of the design languages and run with it. And one thing that's important to note, if we go back a level, we see here that there's material or Cupertino is one level, and then below that is the general widgets layer. And that's where you can compose anything that you want. But we see here that this import statement says flutter/material .dart. And that file actually gets you access to both the material, so that's the Google specific styles, and the widgets layer. So even if you use Cupertino, don't feel like something's wrong if you're also importing Flutter/material. You will do that pretty much all the time, and it's totally expected. Okay, so as you've heard already on this broadcast, Flutter has this cheeky little line that we love to say over and over again: everything is a widget. And that is almost true. There's actually a podcast called, I think, It's All Widgets, and it's a great podcast. And if you want to hear interviews with really fun Flutter personalities, then you should check it out. I've listened to every episode because it's great. But anyway, everything is a widget. And one of the first things that is important to do is centralize your styling. If you come from a web background, then you're familiar with having CSS, cascading style sheets, declarations of your style. And it may feel kind of odd to have the intermingling of your widgets and your styling in Flutter. And you will occasionally override your centralized styling, but one of the first things that we're going to do is talk about how to have the majority of our styling logic in one place. And this is also just kind of one of those widgets, right? Even very abstract things can also be widgets, and we'll get into that more later as well. But this theme class, you stick it on your root material app, which you saw if you read through chapter 3. And it has a lot of different things going on. You actually can expect an upcoming widget of the week about the theme widget. So get excited for that. But there's too many attributes on the theme widget to cover all today. So we're just going to hit a few of them. But let's hop over into just a pinch of code here, and I'm going to zoom in and then, zoom out and then swipe over. Okay, so I am looking at our app almost exactly where we left it last week. The only real difference is that I have already defined an official theme. So I'm going to open that file, and I've called it apod theme. For those who might have missed some of last week, APOD stands for Astronomy Picture of the Day. And as you can see on the right, we have some astronomy pictures. And our app is just kind of celebrating how cool the sky is. So just like in the book, where the app that they're making is a recipe app called Food or Lich. I prefer Lich over food, actually, personally. Halloween, but ours is just called the APOD theme. And so one of the two things that you kind of do up front, first of all, you want to think about some of your values for light mode and some of your values for dark mode. And then beyond that, you want to think about each individual part of your app and start supplying values for each. So the first thing that we've set up here is our light text theme. And then we have a dark text theme. And if I scroll over to the right here, we can see that in our light text theme, so this is when the user is not in dark mode. Oh, that's really an impressive tooltip. When the user is not in dark mode, of course, we have black as the color for our font. And you could choose some kind of dark gray, right? Whatever you want there. And then when the user is in dark mode, of course, black would be a really difficult font color to work with. So then we switch over to white. And scrolling down, just like they do in the book on the Food or Lich theme class, we've got a static method that is going to return our light theme. And, it just does kind of a little bit of juggling here. It uses our light text theme for the text theme on our theme data instance. By the way, theme data is what you actually supply to a theme. So the theme data, we can already see not everything is a widget, because theme data is technically just a Dart class. It's not a widget, but it's inserted into a widget, and it's all the information that that widget needs to start answering questions about what color this should be and how big that should be. So theme data, not technically a widget, but also useless without its complementary widget. But we have a static method that returns our light theme. And then we also have a static method that returns our dark theme. And again, just a little bit of juggling going on here. Now, these by themselves don't do a whole lot. So you have to stick them into your material app. And that is not in this file. That is still in main.dart. And in our material app, there's a couple of different parameters that we can pass for this. One is theme. And this is just kind of your default theme. And then there's dark theme, which is, of course, if the user is in dark mode. By default, Flutter will honor the system preference. So whatever the user has set in their phone, Flutter will honor. You can override that if you want to always be in light mode or always be in dark mode and just, to heck or high water with what the user wants. We're going with dark mode. You can do that, but in general, it's probably best to just stick with, let the user system preference rule the day. But I want to quickly just peek at dark mode. And so I'm going to comment out this line, and I'm going to change dark mode to be in the main parameter slot. And this will, because I'm running on a fake emulator, or I'm running on a Windows emulator here, and not a mobile emulator. I don't really have a way to just toggle that like you would on a phone. But anyway, we can see here that we have a pretty good dark mode. And all our backgrounds turned that kind of nice deep gray that is common. And then we've got white text on top of it, and it looks great. So I think all of our dark mode aficionados are going to be happy with that. All right. And now I'm going to switch back to the slides. Okay. Some more on widgets. So there's different kinds of widgets. We briefly hit on this last week, but some widgets actually lay things out on your screen. Some of them put different blocks of color. They add some text. They put a button there. They navigate users from one screen to the next. These are all different roles that widgets can play. There's also a whole different class of widget that is used to maintain the state of your app. And these are on the bottom here. We have the stateless and stateful widgets, which you and I as Flutter developers encounter all the time. We're regularly extending stateless and stateful widgets, and we'll be doing that today and probably every week of this book club. And then that last one there, inherited widget, I actually saw a question in the chat earlier today, and maybe we can get into this more later. This is kind of a hint into state management, but that inherited widget, that whole family of widgets actually is extremely interesting because they are only there to answer questions for their descendants. So the theming, which we're talking about right now, is a very common instance of this, where a widget might say, hey, I don't know what color to make this text theme. Does anyone know what color? And so what it does is it asks Flutter to look up the framework tree and find the nearest theme widget. And then it says, hey, I got some text. How should I draw it? And the inherited widget doesn't directly inform any of our UI layout, but it is there to answer questions. So it's like, oh, you've got a headline 2 text. Well, that's a such and such color. And then the rest of your app is able to follow, the centralized theme that you've specified. So inherited widgets, extremely important, but we'll get into those more later. Okay, next thing that they talked about in chapter 3 was the scaffold. And the scaffold is certainly for any mobile app. I actually haven't really thought much about its applicability to web and desktop, but at a minimum for mobile, the scaffold is one of the most important widgets because it's got a slot for all of the things that your users are used to in all of their apps. And, that includes an app bar at the top, which can have a back button and maybe some action icons. Maybe it's got the little avatar that you click to go to your profile or however you want to set it up. a bottom navigation bar so the user can flip between the primary tabs of your app, potentially a floating action button. We're not going to get to that today, but all of the things that your users are used to in their apps, the scaffold widget is ready to accept and lay out in the places that, you know, everyone anticipates. And there's all these other ones as well, the bottom sheet, the drawer. We're going to get to these later in the course. Okay, so here we have some wireframes. These were drawn up with Figma. And Figma is a great wireframe all the way to hi-fi tool. But for now, we're looking at this, and this is kind of what we want to build. So we've got a bottom nav bar there. And I must confess, I did a very poor job following some of the very specific details of these wireframes. So that's a demerit for me. I've got some of the pages are out of order, but we've got on the leftmost tab in the wireframe, not so much in what is coded. There's a list of all of the previous astronomy pictures of the day. And then in the center, we have just a zoomed in view of today's astronomy picture of the day. So I guess that would be the astronomy picture of today, the APOT, we'll call it. And then on the right is a favorited astronomy pictures of the day tab, where anytime you've clicked a heart icon, they'll appear there. And just as a spoiler, we've totally glossed over that for today because that is really starting to get more into state management. And then, of course, we had navigation last week, and we're not deleting any of that navigation. If you click on a card anywhere, you know, it'll take you into that detail page for that picture. Okay, so we're back into code. I'm going to switch over to that screen. And all right. So git checkout chapter 3, step 2, add nav bar. All right. Now, one thing that's kind of nice for my purposes is that if you just change your files via Git, the hot restart machinery doesn't seem to pick that up. So the punchline hasn't been spoiled yet, which is really exciting for me. Okay. So I'm going to drink some water. Okay. Apologies. In our main APOD app here, we've started to move a lot of things out. Homepage is moved out. I think we did that last week. I'll open up homepage again. And homepage is starting to look pretty different. We used to, in the body, have a whole bunch of stuff because we just had one page. But now something interesting is already happening here where we have a list of pages kept somewhere else. And what we're showing in our app at any given time is the selected index from that list. And if we scroll up a little bit, we'll see that we have a selected index that starts at 0. So we're going to be defaulting to the leftmost tab or rightmost in a right to left localization scheme. And then we have a couple different pages here. And we have our current APOD page, and this is where I deviated from the mockups. We have a recent APOD page, which for me, that's the history of everything. And then we have favorites, and that is currently left as an exercise for our imagination. Now, if we scroll back down, what we've added here is the bottom navigation bar. And again, this is all going in the scaffold. So it knows the app bar should be at the top. It knows the body should be in the middle. And obviously, the bottom navigation bar should be at the bottom. So we've passed one of these in, and we've supplied the current index. And we have a tap handler, and this is going to be called whenever one of our users clicks something in our bottom navigation bar. And what does that tap handler do? Well, it just updates the selected index. And then it calls this set state function, which we're going to get into a bit more in chapter 4 when we talk about reactive UI models, which Flutter uses. And then lastly, we just have all of the items in our nav bar. And they have an icon and some text. So let's refresh here and see a nav bar. And our on the leftmost tab is the current picture of the day, which is not yet implemented, as we can see. In the middle is our old functionality, where we have the different historical pictures of the day. And on the right is an also imaginary favorited APODs page. So just with this, and also all these pages are broken out into their own files as well. But we'll get into that when we start working on cards. So with just this little bit of code, we've already started to stitch some navigation into our app, and pretty exciting. So now I'm going to switch back to the slides. And here we go. Okay, so there's different kinds of layout widgets as well, kind of worth knowing, or UI widgets, sorry. Some just position things primarily, and you can think of these as like basically layout widgets. So container is one of the most common. If you come from a web background, container is kind of like a div. So just a very generic bucket of stuff. Padding just says, however much space is available. I care about, 8 pixels around the perimeter, and everything that's left over in the middle, I have no idea how much that is, by the way, but whatever is left over in the middle, my children can fight for it. So not a very good parent. But again, it's just the layout of your app, but it's not actually any end content. So everything here on the left in this layout widgets column, they are things that just put your actual content in the right place. And then on the right, we've got some common display widgets, and these are your actual content. So text, images, buttons, chips. Those are those like little red circles that say how many unread notifications you have. For me, it's normally in the thousands. I apologize if that makes anyone itch. Okay, and we're already back to code. This is exciting. And here we go. Now, I really liked this part of chapter 3 because when you start putting together the, let's see here, git checkout chapter 3, step 3, and what the first one. When you start putting together the cards in chapter 3, the UI that you're building very quickly looks like something that you would recognize in a real app that people would download and look at and be like, hey, this app looks pretty good. What we have on the right now is not that. Like, it doesn't look good, but that's intentional. We were just throwing all the things in place kind of very simply. But now in chapter 3 for this card exercise, we're actually able to make some UI elements that actually look pretty good. And that was really fun, I thought. So if I refresh here, actually, let's look at the code first. So I have apod card, and this is a really nice place to open the file all the way at the bottom. Good idea. Thank you. Okay, so we have an apod card widget, and we're extending from stateless widget. I promised earlier that we would soon be writing something that extended from stateless widget, and I'm a man of my word. Now, this apod card just takes one thing. This is a nice pattern in Flutter when possible. Develop a widget that takes a data model that you have written. So if you remember from last week, we have an apod class, and this represents a picture of the day that we've gotten from our API. And at the bottom, we've just kind of faked 3 of them so that we have something to work with, because we're not really getting into network things yet. But eventually we'll load these from the server and things will really start to be dynamic. But this is our class, and it represents a simplified, centralized way to think about pictures of the day that we know we can control and rely on. And then when you make widgets that need to do stuff with one of these classes, it's really nice to just pass in the whole class. So all we accept, or all we require in our constructor for the apod card, as we're calling it, is an instance of a picture of the day, which is awesome. And then we start to put all of these different things together. So we have, well, if you went through chapter 3, you saw a lot of this, but there's, we're setting up the shape and the structure and the size of the card up here. We're giving it rounded corners with this border radius. And then we position internally to the card all of its children with this stack widget. And the stack widget is worth hitting a little bit because it's one of the most important widgets. It was surprising to me when I was getting more into Flutter how often the answer of, well, how the heck am I going to build that UI is you just need a stack. So anytime you've got a space and you want to position things very particularly within that space, a stack is what you want. This is equivalent to relative positioning again, if you're coming from a web background. So what do we have in our stack? First of all, I'm going to refresh so we can actually look at this UI before we think about the contents of the stack. So there we go. Okay, we have, we see what's on the right. It's similar to what you made in chapter 3, but let's think about what a stack does. Remember, if you went through chapter 3, before all of the text was positioned, everything was smushed in the top left on top of itself. So that is the default position where something goes within a stack. If you want it there, then great. If you don't want it there, then you wrap it in this special widget called a positioned widget. And the positioned widget has a couple different parameters, but the most common ones are top, bottom, left, and right. And they are the distance that you are offset from that boundary of the stack. So right now our stack is occupying almost the entire size of the card. There's just a little bit of padding, which is kind of pushing everything in, and that's pretty nice for us. But other than that, the whole thing is the stack. And so by default, everything was in the top left, and you saw that in chapter 3. But we don't want everything to be there, just like you didn't in the book. And so we've got our title. This is not wrapped in a positioned widget. So it is actually in the top left, and we can see that. And then below that, we say, hey, if we have a date, then let's position that 32 pixels down and render the date. And so there it appears. And then we have positioned all the way at the bottom and smushed up against the right. So 0 pixels away from the right boundary is our byline, is the author or the photographer that we're crediting. Now, this APOD card is a really important concept because now we're getting into some reusability of our code. This is assuming that we want the same UI to draw in multiple places, then this is going to be usable in all of those places. So let's hop back over to our current APOD page. And before, this just said, this had a text widget that said current APOD, and it wasn't very exciting. But now we're using this APOD card, and we can see that what we're passing into it is an instance of our data class. And we're done. And if we hop over to the recent page where we have all the different cards showing up, so this is obviously, much nicer than the old layout. So I'll go to the recent APOD page, and we have that same list view builder. We have the same gesture detector, which handles navigation for us. And then ultimately, again, a little padding. And this is positioning the entire card within the page. And then we have just another APOD card. And it's whichever sample we are in the index as this item builder loops over our entire list. So our APOD card is showing up in multiple places and is already really starting to pay dividends for having broken it out into its own widget. So you'll do that all the time as a Flutter developer. Now, there's one thing that I noticed as we scroll down, positioning our date a mere 32 pixels below the title works when the title does not wrap, but it works much less well if the title wraps. And we're kind of in a bit of a pickle here with our current implementation because it's not clear what we would do with this positioned widget. It's obvious when you look at your UI, well, it's wrapping there. So I want 32 is not enough, but we can't just put 64 here because while it fixes this one, it makes these look really silly. So we need a totally different strategy in this spot. And if you remember, what we essentially want is a layout widget that says the first one goes here and the second widget goes below the first one. Wherever the first one ends, the second one is below that. If there's a third widget, you go below the second one. And that exists, and it's called a column. And it's one of the most common widgets that you'll use in Flutter. So we're going to use it here and refactor this real quick, because what we have right now is just not working. So we know that these two pieces of text need to be one on top of the other in a straightforward way like that. So let's start by, we're keeping the stack because we certainly want our author byline all the way at the bottom. And we're going to want this column in the top left. So everything in that sense is still working. The stack still working for us. And the first thing that we're going to do is just set up a column. And the column has children, which is a list of widgets. And into those widgets will go these two items. We're going to have one extra comma to get rid of here. So once we put these widgets here, let's see how, oh, right. This actually isn't going to work because of one little detail. The positioned widget requires that its parent be a stack, but we've just had a column cut in line. So all we have to do now is get rid of the positioned widget entirely. And now we'll re-render. So in terms of our top-down orientation, this is looking really good. Unfortunately, the text is centered, which doesn't work for our purposes. Now, the column knows that you might not want everything centered. And in fact, it just knows that it has no idea the left-right orientation of what you want. And so it has this concept of its main axis. And because it lays things down top to bottom, its main axis is up-down. But then it also has a cross axis, which for the column is left-right. So we can set our cross-axis alignment to be cross-axis alignment.start. And voila, I slide over. Now remember, hot reload is just paying such big dividends for us right now, as we're able to quickly see the results of what we type, and we don't have to wait many painful minutes to have the whole app rebuild, just to slide this text over. Now it is a little tight, I think, when we had that 32 pixels of positioning when we were directly in the stack before. I do think that looked a little better. This, I feel, is kind of cramped. So what I think we should do now is wrap this text in a padding widget. And we don't want all. No, we certainly don't want all. That would make it look quite bad. So we'll use the only constructor on edge insets and just start with something simple. We have to say top. And so that is going to add 4 pixels of padding to the top, which functionally moves our item down. A little counterintuitive for a second there, but you definitely get used to it. And at any rate, I think this, even just those 4 pixels, makes a pretty big difference. So this is already, I think, looking pretty good. And critically, down here, this one looks good. And the date is way lower within the card than for any of the other cards, but the columns got there. Got that detail all figured out for us. So let's see here. I'm going to switch back to the slides. I think, yes, okay. So there is actually basically no more to do. We've made it to the end. Now, Sarah added another nice little doodad for us here. Oh, I'm going to...
We were coming on to join you here because it looked like you were done with the AMA stuff.
Yeah, no, you are welcome to. Can check out chapter 3, step 3, v2. So Sarah, and again, you can see this code on GitHub. She did a nice refactoring of these cards and gave us an overlay. And this is pretty important for our text being readable with all these stars kind of conflicting with the boundaries of the text. So definitely check that out on GitHub. The whole, I think this is a really nice UI win. So anyway, we're going to break now for chapter 3 AMA, just like the slide that I briefly showed indicated. So
you'll stay with us to answer questions, right?
Sure. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
All right. That sounds good. Okay. Sarah, do you have any questions ready for us?
Yes.
Everybody else, we just threw her on this, so yeah, she's new to throwing these up. So
here is a nice question.
Okay, it says the positioned I use must have the height and width defined. Why don't yours raise an exception? Huh.
I think maybe we're talking
question.
with constraints. Yeah, Simon, why don't you come on and tell us the answer to that question? We'll bring in our own
It has to do
resident
with the
expert.
size of the children.
Hello.
Hey.
So
yeah, Simon, learn us all good here.
I'm going to tell you what happens here and the reason why this happens. It's to do with the constraints being passed down. So if there's no constraint for it to be a certain size, you have to specify the width or the height depending on if the constraints are the vertical or the horizontal. So imagine you've got like a center and you put a stack inside, right? Well, let's say it's actually more about unbound heights, but we won't go into that too far because we'll be here for ages. But just imagine you've got like a widget with a stack inside. The stack doesn't know how big to be. So when you put a widget and say it's positioned in the top left, or top left of where, because it's not got any size attached to it. If it's the only positioned widget inside a stack, or you only have position widgets in a stack, then you might need to specify the width and height. So I'll give you a quick brief to try and keep this simple, because this is actually quite an important idea, right? Stacks lay out the widgets that are not positioned first, and then the position ones afterwards, right? Meaning that if you have a position that says top left, like it's a position left 0, top 0, and you have one at the bottom, like bottom 0, right 0, each one has an icon in, which is like just an icon widget, right? They're about 24 pixels big. Now they will be on top of each other if you didn't actually have something to push them apart. So you need another widget in there, which is your size of your actual content that you're trying to put the widgets on, the icons in this case, on top of. So in that case, you might have a piece of text, and that way the icons would sit on the top left and the bottom right of the text, right?
One of the things I've noticed related to this is I think it's like a container, and you can, if you'll have it in a stack, everything's happy. You go and you put it in a position and it disappears. Yep. Because it's very happily no size. So
actually, I actually wrote a couple of notes about something that was brought up during the meeting there, during the thing stack.expand. So you got stack. So stack has a parameter called fit, and fit by default I think is expand. I can't remember. Do you know what? No, it's not. It's there's 3 of them, but the one that most people don't realize is you can do expand, which basically says every widget inside should fill the stack. It's very handy. There's a couple of other ones, but another interesting one, if you want to make a stack and have some content to fill on, like let's say you want a common one is what you call scrim, which is like a shadow that you might have like along the bottom of an image, for example, right? The image invokes the size, but you want the shadow to fill the content of the image, in which case you want to make sure that your stack is set to fit pass through, which means it will just use whatever is returned. And then the scrim would be position.fill, because you want it to fill on top of the image. Anyway, this is all good talking about, and it's very hard to see without code. So go away and look at the stack parameters and the positioned parameters, and you'll learn some stuff.
Thanks, Simon. That was really great. Let's see another one. I see a question about styling or scaling with styles. This is pretty interesting. How can I scale a switch widget? Does anyone know? I've never tried to do this.
Animated switcher?
I think so.
So I haven't looked at that particular sub-theme of the theme. Simon, do you have something you want to say?
Well, I was going to say, like, scale a switch widget. I mean, it depends on the. I mean, if you just want to scale it, wrap it in transform.scale.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Right? I mean, that'll scale it. You just tell it, I want it twice as big. I want it half the size. You can just specify what fraction of size that you want it to be.
Again,
it's based on a parameter of theme data, which I didn't even know there was one for the scale. So,
yeah. Although I guess if you calculate your size based on some parameter in the theme data, then you could put your animated switcher in an animated container and then change the size of the animated container.
Or it's possible our Browmeister maybe is confused on the widget, because I don't think we have just a switch widget, right?
Yeah, no, there is no switch widget that I know of.
There's a switch widget. It's the
Yeah,
toggle
I
switch.
think there is.
There's a widget for that?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's called switch.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's what he's talking about. He's saying the size of it. So it's not so much he wants to scale it as he wants to change the
There's
size
a
of
thing
it.
called switch theme, which is inside, and the switch theme data, and switch theme data apparently has what parameters?
So
Maybe it's the target size. I don't know. I don't see anything in here that directly relates to what he's talking about. So hopefully we've helped.
So we're gonna have to get back to you on this because
Please,
this is a good question. You
follow up in the chat, and we'll see what we can do to get to it. Have we got another question?
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Oh, she pulled the plug on herself.
Uh-oh. We're throwing her in stuff, and she doesn't know what she's
Sarah.
doing yet. So we didn't train her well. So that's probably our fault.
Wrong button.
Too much power.
It's okay, Sarah. We all do it.
There we go. This is a good one, too.
How do I lay out widgets like a grid, handle gesture-based zoom in and out? Are they optimized for such behavior? Everything optimized for such behavior. This is Flutter. That's the answer to that one. No, how do I lay out widgets in a grid? They have a grid view. There's a widget called Grid View, which does exactly that, and it makes you scroll the grid as well. There's several ways to lay out things in a grid, and it all depends on what you're trying to do. It says handle gesture-based zoom in and out. So I'm wondering if you mean, my first inclination when I hear that is there's in Google Photos, right? You have like your grid of images, and when you long press, it scales each image as you move your finger over them to select them. It's kind of like a nice effect. If you're trying to do that kind of thing, you can. There are some code examples out there that are already done in Flutter because I wrote one. But yeah, it's you could use a table widget that can do a grid view, or simply rows and columns will all support that. And yeah, each widget you can wrap in a gesture which handles scale. There's a scale update, on scale start, on scale end, and on scale update, which lets you control that. I think that. Sorry, I've kind of just dived straight in there. Does anyone else have anything to add? Sorry.
Well, I presume they're talking about like pinching and stuff like that. You know, not so much the special case of the long press, which is a pretty good example you gave. So what you're saying is we could take like just the grid view itself, and we could actually wrap that in something that would scale it based upon the gesture, right?
Or each individual item, right? So that as individual item is selected, it will animate its scale. You can do that kind of thing.
Absolutely, you can handle either way, right? Exactly.
But yeah, if you're trying to handle a gesture on zoom in, zoom out, then that is gesture detector is the widget you're looking for, and it has 3 functional parameters for scaling. Actually, it has several. It has horizontal, vertical, and pan, which handle the 3. I think there's another set as well. There's gestures for everything in gesture detector. There you go.
Yeah, pretty much.
Do we have another question?
All right.
I noticed one, if you all don't mind. I'm seeing this repeated several times and various versions. Do we need a safe area if we use a scaffold? You know, the wisdom on that used to be no. However, iOS now has this little notch thing at the bottom where you swipe up. And if you don't have a safe area protecting that, your scaffold will cover it. And then the user will get frustrated trying to swipe up. So if you create the safe area first, then put your scaffold in it, that'll make sure your scaffold doesn't cover that and it doesn't mess with your user's ability to use the phone. What's it, Simon?
You want the safe area in the body of the scaffold.
Right.
Because so let's say you have an app bar in your scaffold, it will cover the top area of the screen. If you put in a safe area, then it's going to push your app bar down below the safe spot. And the same for the bottom, right?
Right.
But if it pushes it down, then your status bar is going to be above your app bar.
No, we're not talking about the bottom. We're talking. I'm just talking about the top. But even the bottom, the body, and then inside your body, you can put your safe area, and then you can put like a stack with your thing at the bottom if you wanted to push it.
Play with it both ways. See what you get. See what you like.
There's plenty of options. And needed is the wrong word here. Like, it's not needed, right? Like, it's up to you how you want it to behave, right?
just make sure that you check it on iOS to make sure you didn't mess with that thing and prevent the user from being able to swipe up.
Yes. That is actually a big part of the next Boring Show episode. So stay tuned for that. Exactly what Scott's talking about.
I
got another question.
I was going to say I'm very happy the Boring Show is continuing after Philip. So that's amazing.
Yes.
So thank you for that.
Yes.
Big shoes to fill, but I'm just putting on 8 layers of socks and trying my best. Okay, so we've got another question here. Is the position widget, should that be the child of the stack? And that answer is just yes.
Yes.
To my knowledge, the position widget, there's nowhere else it can go. And we saw, I didn't really show the error message. I was just like, oh, it's not rebuilding. But when I wrapped those 2 widgets in a column, that severed the direct connection between the position widget and the stack. And, everything fell apart at that point. So yes, stacks contain positioned widgets.
I'm gonna just caveat this point.
Great.
Sorry, I'm gonna caveat this. This isn't correct. You're totally correct.
I think Simon's going to caveat everything everybody says.
Well, no. So like expanded is the same type of widget. Expanded and positioned are very similar in the sense that they are both what you call parent data widgets. They supply data to the parent, but that relationship can be done through, it can push itself through lots of stateful and stateless widgets.
Yes, that's
and render object only widgets. So what it means is that you can actually put your own stateful widget or stateless widget and a positioned inside that, and still work inside a stack. And if it doesn't work, it will tell you so, right? So if you try it, it will break and it will give you the error in the log. So
right. Yeah. And the reason for that is that those stateless and stateful widgets, they aren't layout widgets. Remember when we showed the layout UI widgets versus the state widgets, and it was stateful, stateless, and inherited. There are some widgets that are just like, I don't do anything with the UI. I don't care. And that direct connection can pass right through them. Simon's definitely correct.
All right. We probably have time for another question.
Yeah, I was going to say, I've got one last very quick one before we get on to part 2. And remember, there will be more Q&A later. But
please keep your questions going.
Okay.
That particular one was called smooth rotation. I'm the guy who was holding it up and twisting it in the air in front of the crowd. Simon's the guy who wrote it. And yes, we're aware that it needs updated. It is in Simon Lightfoot's repos under Lightfoot on GitHub. So feel free to fork it and bring it up to speed.
Yeah, send me a PR.
Yep. Now, with that, I believe Craig has some more stuff he can do here now with chapter 4.
And more questions.
Right?
There's a lot of questions we didn't get to, but we'll see what we have time for.
We're going to Q&A again after 4 too, after chapter 4.
Yep.
So,
okay.
Great.
We just want to make
All
sure
right, well,
we get
if you
to
guys
it.
could take us off and share Greg's screen, that'd be wonderful.
It's just us again, folks. Chapter 4 slides. Here we go. Okay. So if you read through chapter 4, again, great. If not, no worries. Little spoiler here. We start to talk a little bit about more of the behind the scenes and the conceptual stuff with Flutter in chapter 4. And then it ends with a DevTools demo, which is very cool. So, I do not have the correct thing up to drive the slides. Now I do. Okay. One of the first things in chapter 4 is this formula, I guess we'll call it. And I think that it warrants some serious attention. So if you see this, the way it's said out loud, people will say, oh yes, your UI is a function of your app's state, or maybe just is a function of your state. What does this mean? Well, it means that your app state, first we have to define that. Your app state, maybe you have this idea of whether or not your app is loading, whether it's launching currently, whether the user has just clicked the button on their home screen. And so if that is your app state, if that is such a true, then this function of our state, the UI that it should output, is probably your splash screen. Maybe that's spinning or doing, some kind of cheeky little animation. But then that doesn't last long and the app is ready to go. And then maybe there's more parts of your app's state. Maybe there's a current user or an active user attribute. And this is a nullable instance of your user data model. And if that part of the state, if that current or active user is in fact null, then you want to render the login screen. Once the user does log in and that's set, then you want to take them to either the home page or, maybe they can even configure their home page. So that's some more state that we've loaded down from the server, and you're going to route them to some other page. Other aspects about this, the UI being a function of state. If you've got a list of, I don't know, just pulling something out of the air, like astronomy pictures of the day, and the user can favorite them, which again, we didn't get to yet. Part of your app state is like, which pictures has this user favorited? And then part of the UI that falls out of that is the heart icons for those pictures are red and filled in, as opposed to just an outline for the others. So this UI being a function of state concept is super important, but there's another layer to it that's very important as well. And in Flutter, the UI reacts to your app state. When your app state changes, you don't go and find all the places where that picture of the day shows up with a heart icon and flip all of the hearts to be red and filled in. That's not how it works. The UI is simply going to react to the change in your app state and relay things out and re-render. And this is actually exactly where the famous JavaScript library got its name, because that was one of the first, maybe there were others before it, I'm not sure, but it was certainly one of the first very popular JavaScript frameworks that pioneered this reactive UI model, where the middle guts, so in that world, it's React is what's watching your state and re-rendering everything appropriately. And Flutter does the exact same thing. Flutter is heavily influenced by React in this way. So when your state changes, Flutter's got your back and it's just going to redraw everything. Now, thinking about how does this actually work? Imagine you have some code like this, and this is the code that is going to render that heart icon on a picture of the day, and it's either favorited or not. So we've got some hand waving here around state management. Again, that specter always looms large, but imagine you have a state management solution and you're able to find out, hey, is this particular picture of the day favorited or not? And that returns a Boolean. And then you simply draw, you return from your stateless widget, probably in this case, a red filled in icon if it is in fact favorited, or a black border icon if they have not yet favorited it. And so then when your state changes and Flutter reruns all the UI code, it gets back to this line and it returns the other thing, and your UI just magically updates. So this is a really important concept to get in your head as you get deeper and deeper into Flutter, that somewhere else is the source of truth, and the UI is just always reflecting that source of truth. So next thing, it's more water time, sorry. A little bit about how Flutter actually does this. So again, if you've read chapter 4, you saw a couple diagrams like this, and we've been writing a lot of code in this build method of stateless or stateful widgets, mostly stateless for us so far. And what that does is return some more widgets, if you remember. And each of those widgets has a build method. So it's just kind of build methods all the way down until you get to leaf nodes, which, return some text or return an image or something like that, right? That's the end of the chain in that direction. But otherwise, it's just build methods all the way down. So whenever something changes at a given part in your app, all the build methods below that will be rerun and relayed out. And chapter 4 also talks a little bit about these different trees that are in Flutter. And if I have one thing that I would recommend for everyone who's new to Flutter right now, it's probably to not worry about these. Because honestly, I was fluttering pretty happily for quite a while before I ever heard what an element was or a render object was. And I was pretty content with myself, I'm not gonna lie. So don't feel intimidated by these things. They are there. And there will be times as you get more and more clever and try to do sneakier things with your UI where awareness of these is the only way to do what you want. But they are not to be, they should not be intimidating you for quite some time. Or actually, they should really never be intimidating you. But don't even worry about them for now. Okay, there's some more information in that same vein of stuff to worry about later, but just know it's there. And that's the life cycle of widgets. And if you're doing something really clever, like maybe, we were just talking about that icon with the heart. And the way that was written, it's just going to immediately snap from one to the other. But maybe you want something to animate from one value to the next instead. And in that case, you can hook into these lifecycle events. And you can notice when my value is different than the previous value, and you can trigger an animation in that regard. So there's different lifecycle events with widgets. Again, don't worry about them right now. They're there. It's useful to know they're there. But if you are feeling intimidated by them, then certainly don't worry about them because they are not strictly necessary. Okay, and now we are nearly to the end of chapter 4, and we're just going to talk about some DevTools stuff. Now, if you, again, come from a web background, you can tell that I do because I just constantly talk about that. You love the browser inspector tools going all the way back to when Firefox rolled out Firebug, which was the first one to my knowledge. And then every other browser was like, that's sweet, and added it in. So one of the things that I wondered when I got into Flutter is how am I going to make UIs that, without that kind of tooling? Well, much to my delight, Flutter has it as well. So let's give it a peek. I need to go to this one, and I've already launched it here. Now there's a couple different ways you can do it. If you're in VS Code, then there's this little Flutter icon in the top right, and that is going to launch a specific piece of your DevTools in VS Code. And I don't recommend that one as much because it's in VS Code and it's competing for precious, real estate with the actual code that I'm writing. So I like to launch it in a browser separately instead. And you do that in VS Code by looking down at the bottom here, and you'll see DevTools. And if you click that, you've got Open DevTools in a browser. And it takes a second, so I just did it a second ago. And now, this is pretty cool. Yeah, we are actually, because I kind of want to look at the UI as well. This is a bit of a screen juggling act. But anyway, there's a lot of stuff going on here. We'll spend most of our time right now looking at the Flutter inspector, which is a lot like what is most commonly used in browsers, just the DOM inspector. But you've got a nice performance overlay here, which profiles your app a bit. That looks at like redraws. Then you have the CPU profiler. Are you burning the CPU really hot? Are you wasting memory? Network requests, make sure that those are kind of going as you expect, and you can see if they're taking a long time. Logging, there's all these different kinds of tools, and they're very, very handy. But the Flutter inspector is probably the most accessible one and is currently not responding to clicks, which is an interesting development. Nothing is responding to clicks. Aha! Love it. The demo gods, they always bite. Let's try again. Did it refresh? It did. Okay, that didn't happen. We all know that didn't happen. The Flutter inspector can help you out quite a bit. Let's say something here wasn't how we wanted it and we didn't know why. Let's pretend, let's look at something that we want to investigate. just imagine this title was wrong in some way and we want to find it. So we're looking here at a lot of this code, and much of it should be pretty familiar because we wrote it. So we've got our APOD card. That's obviously, going to contain the problem. So we click on APOD card and it starts to show some different graphs of what's what and how much size are things taking up. But we can ultimately be like, okay, yeah, we had a stack. I remember that. And padding, or I do remember, oh, hey, look at this. Where's our column? I don't know what browser I'm on. Oh, here's the column. Okay, interesting. So this might be the lower ones. Let's look at this text. Is this our thing? Oh no, this is the name. It says Jack. Anyway, we don't need to fully drill into every single thing here, but I know I've watched people give these DevTools talks like 10 times myself, and it never really sunk in all that you could do until I did it myself. There's a great YouTube video with Philip and Kenzie, one of the engineers who, with her own raw expertise, built these dev tools, and they walk through all these different screens and really get deep into everything that you can do here. But what's important to know right now is when your layout is not doing what you think it should be doing, and you don't know why, the dev tools are able to really help you out. Oh, actually, I'm just noticing that it even just shows the text. So that's a bit of a spoiler, but a very helpful one. So if the text that we were upset about was the title, you can even just see it here and start to look at values. And just like in web dev tools, you can change values here and they will be updated. So I haven't done that myself in a long time. I'm only going to spend 10 seconds trying to remember how to do it. There is a way to edit this. Is it this? Oh, here, this should do something. Oh yeah, nice. Look, I changed the cross-axis alignment to be end instead of start. And maybe I decide that that's good. Maybe I decide that it's terrible. But there's just a lot of, what do we have here? Stretch? What does that do? Not much, due to other reasons. Anyway, DevTools, they are very helpful. They're there to help you unravel the mysteries of why your UI is being petulant, and I recommend them. So now I think we should return to general Q&A.
All right, great. Thank you, Craig. That was awesome. Of course, live TV as always.
Of course.
Yep.
It's gonna bite you when it bites you.
You did not sacrifice a chicken or burn incense. So.
And that's on me. That's on me. I should have done those things. Honestly.
Okay, but before we get into
before we get into the Q&A and get everybody out here yet.
I guess take it, Scott. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. We do want to touch on what I mentioned before about what the Flutter community has to offer you. And so we're going to try this as a share. We had a little bit of an issue just recently with it, so I may need Danielle to take over if you suddenly can't hear me anymore. So let's see what happens here. But okay, 1 second here. We can pull the question down for a moment. Thank you. Okay, so Flutter community, what it has to offer you and a number of other things. First of all, there is the Flutter community Medium with over 500,000 minutes read every month. Then we also have, check this out, the Flutter community Slack has 15,000 members. Yes, 1,000. If you go to if you go to flutter.dev community, you'll find all kinds of great resources, including the Flutter community GitHub, which is right here. It is the home to orphaned Flutter packages where we find maintainers for them. Flutter community is also behind great things such as Hack 19, Hack 20, this show where we bring you Googlers like Kevin Moore, Miriam, and Chris Sells. And there's this guy, Craig, I believe, who's around here somewhere too. We also find you speakers for your GDG events and for bigger events such as DroidCons and Flutter Europe. Don't forget the Geekly Flutter Global Summit, which is actually having another one in December. We also had the Us 2 panel in New York. Yes, that's 12 of us up there. Getting 12 of us onto one stage was quite an experience. We also do events with Google, such as the 30 Days of Flutter. There was also Flutter Vikings, the Flutteristas Conference, which I have never before seen a 4-day conference. That was fantastic. There are also interviews, such as the interview with Nilay, who's here in the chat, with Brian Egan, with Martin Jarrett, and Philip. And is it me, or, Martin and Philip are tall or Jay is short? I'm not sure which. Then there are also videos and this show, of course. But one of the interesting things that we have been running into lately is everybody's a little short-handed. So we're looking possibly to hire a community manager, and that's where you all come in. If you want to support all the great work, please go over to our Patreon over at Flutter Community. And we're crossing our fingers that at some point we'll be able to maybe hire an intern and throw them some peanuts and bananas and have them do all the work for us. But that is patreon.com Flutter Community. And with that, whoop, where'd everybody go? There we are. Coming, going, coming, going. What happened to Danielle?
Where's Craig?
I think we're trying to add people at the same time, and then they're moving around, and I'll add when someone removes, or vice versa.
There we go.
Okay.
All right, Sarah, do we have some questions ready?
We do. There are a lot of really good questions. I don't know how many we'll get to, but sorry I jumped the gun and pushed this too early before Scott, but here it is now.
And let me real quick just point out, ask your questions, and if we don't get to them here, we can get back to them on Twitter. You can ask them other ways. We've got the resources that Sarah had mentioned earlier. So keep asking questions, even if we don't have time to get to all of them. We hope we can, but I just wanted to bring that up. And go ahead.
So what's the difference between giving a container? Okay, Simon, you take it.
No, please. As you'll bring up the questions, you read off the questions and I'll shut up.
Okay. Giving a container a height and width, and using box constraints.expand and mentioning the height and width. It's a good question. Simon?
I don't want to answer every question, so I'm like, let other people answer.
I don't actually know.
My answer would be way too general. So,
well, first of all, box constraints.expand, isn't that like sizebox.expand?
Yes, in fact, sizebox.expand, it actually uses box constraints.expand. The width and the height actually override the expanding. So by default, expand means double.infinity, which basically means infinite width and infinite height. Push out to be as big as we can be. So when you specify width, what you're saying is the height should be infinite, but the width should be fixed. And it's the opposite way around when you do it with, let's say you specify the width and you leave the height not specified, then that becomes the infinite boundary. So yeah, there's no real difference. It's when you're giving a width and a height to a widget, you like a container giving a width and height. What it's actually saying is I want to be this big, right? So if your parent is smaller constraint, it will actually, it used to overflow, now it doesn't. It will constrain itself into the parent size. But anyway, that should hopefully help somewhat.
It's probably worth bringing up that we've got a constrained box widget also, if you want to make sure that it's a certain constraint.
There is actually, I tell you what, there's a great article. I'm going to dig it out and put the link in the chat. There's a great article which covers the layout system in full by one of the community members.
I cannot hear something.
Can you not hear me?
Yeah.
I can hear you.
We hear you.
So it's just Craig then. All right, someone message Craig.
Hi, Craig.
There's a do you know the layout? I'll dig it out and I'll make sure it's in the chat. But there's a great. It walks you through each of the different types of layout constraints, how they behave, what centering does, and what alignment does. It's very helpful.
Yes,
and
I think I know exactly.
Good, Sarah, sorry.
Sorry, I was going to say, I think I know which article he's talking about because it's kind of legendary and it's very helpful. Constraints go down and sizes go up, and just keep that in your brain and you'll be good.
Philip did a great short, simplified but good video on the Flutter channel about how the constraints go down and up, and he imitated the little children and
So it's,
with how much they wanted to be and stuff.
It's in the chat, and it's UI layout constraints is the URL, and the key phrase that everyone needs to remember, as Sarah was saying, constraints go down the tree, sizes go up the tree, and parents set the position of the child widget. So it's constraints go down, sizes go up, parent sets position.
Right.
Yes. Perfect. Just make a little song in your head and you'll get it. Here's another good one.
Can I use as many columns, rows, containers together as I want, or is there a limit? Same question about child and children.
So I'm gonna imagine this person's an Android developer.
Yeah.
Because so in Android, when you nest things, right, you're always told don't nest, because the more you nest, the more the layout costs. So a lot of the layouts in Android do essentially have an ON squared sort of product. So to lay out 4 widgets, it has to do it 4 times, for example. I won't go into the complexities of this, but strictly Flutter is a single layout pass UI tree. The reason why they have the constraints the way they are is it means it does single out down and reply with the sizes. So you can nest as much as you want. And in fact, if you look at the DevTools that Craig showed off earlier, you'll see that you have a nested tree of like 200 widgets. It's not a problem. It won't impact. Obviously, there's a limit, right? Don't get me wrong. There's a limit, right? But you're going to be pretty tough to get a normal app to meet those limits.
Yeah, I think there's actually, didn't they get rid of most of the automatically seeing a lot of the automatically created widgets? Don't you need to flip a switch somewhere to tell it that you want to see absolutely everything?
I think there is something like that. Okay.
Okay.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't think it's much
I think that's the case. But all right, I think Craig, you got somewhere you got to be. So
Yeah. I heard he's got a meeting or something.
So thank you so much, Craig. I'm not sure he's even hearing us right now.
I think he's had some audio problems. He looks like he's in one of his.
Everybody
wave.
wave.
Bye, Craig.
Bye,
Have a
Craig.
great job, Craig.
Thank you.
And
You can take them off. See you
Okay.
next week.
all right. Okay, do we have more questions, Sarah?
Yes, there are many good questions here.
All right. So this question is, so every time a heart is filled or emptied, like a favorite APOD, all the widgets below are redrawn. What if we need some widgets above to be redrawn too?
So it's not necessarily about redrawn is probably the term that's misspoken here. It's rebuilt, right? Like in the case of like the widget that we just saw with that Craig was showing off, which is switching the icon from an iconed outline heart to a filled heart, or outline star to a filled star, that kind of thing. That's just changing that widget, and it rebuilds and it will reapply and redraw those widgets because they're marked as dirty. If you want to change, this actually goes into state management, which is a further further chapters. In fact, if you read the book right now and you want to read ahead, be our guest, right? Well, we're not going to talk about it now because we'll get to it in following weeks. But however, yeah, the simple thing is what you want to look at is probably provider, and provider will put you instead for you're providing that the favorite flag, and then any widget can listen to the change and be redrawn when when that state changes.
Steph, there's a question for you here.
Read Flutter Apprentice, especially since it's free until January 6th.
And
There you go.
And if you want to put the link
where
up
can they
again,
get the
so that'll
Flutter
help.
Apprentice book?
Where can they get the
what?
Flutter Apprentice
Wait,
book?
there's a Flutter
Let our
Apprentice book?
producers-
Huh.
There we go.
Yay!
That's right. And we didn't really
Please,
go
okay.
much into introductions here, but it's probably worth mentioning to anybody that's new this week is that Steph was the technical editor of Flutter Apprentice. So she actually has been integrally part of that way for me.
And
So,
somebody put a comment.
yeah.
There was a comment that I'm not talking much, and I talked a lot the last couple of weeks, so I'm trying to give other people a chance to talk.
Sure.
But it's okay. I'm not feeling any dislove or anything here. Plus,
Right.
my dog really wants to get on the camera. I don't know what's going on, but anyway, yes.
Wait,
Get
I
Flutter
almost took- I
Apprentice.
almost-
Sign up for it. It's 3 months free, and also if you love the book, buy it.
That's
Yep.
There are
right.
multiple
One other
options
point
on
on that previous
raywinderlich.com.
question. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yes. No, it's okay. On raywinderlich.com/flutter, you can go in and see our book, and you can buy it if you're loving it after you've gotten it free. That's what we really hope.
Buy one for
Not
your
that
mother.
not that I'm being shy about the fact that it'd be nice to get some more commissions.
Give them away for
We
holiday
worked
gifts.
hard on this book. Yeah.
It's
Oh,
a really
yeah,
good
buy
book.
holiday book. Yeah. You got
On the
programmer friends
previous-
or kids? Yes, buy it. Give it. Oop, here you go. Okay, I'll stop talking now.
That's fine. See, she does talk a lot. No, on the previous question was saying that if you're going to change something, what if you need to change widgets above? What you do in that case is you move up the thing that you're using to rebuild. If it's a value notifier, if it's a consumer, whatever it is, you need to wrap everything you want to rebuild in it. So if you're only rebuilding a heart, but you need to rebuild the things above, expand, basically encompass everything instead of just the heart. So everything you need to rebuild, just wrap that in there, although it's not really advisable to wrap the entire app in it because rebuilding the
if you're
entire
looking
app
for-
is not exactly performant.
If you're looking up for resources, just go look up provider of Flutter, and you'll find lots of articles and information.
Right.
Talking new.
But like Simon said, this is also coming up in a future episode. We will be covering that. So
It is definitely covered. It's talked about briefly, and then there's a significant it's focused on in an upcoming chapter. So we will get to it. But in the
We're going to
next
have
few
a whole
chapters.
episode
Yes.
about city management in
Oh my
like 2 or
goodness.
3 weeks. I'm not sure. Your dog is adorable, by the way. Okay.
Yeah, and now she's blocking
Do we have any
Flutter
more?
Apprentice.
We have a lot of questions.
Sorry, go.
Let's get through some more questions.
Yes. Here's a good one.
that's a great question. So the question here is, can I use Material and Cupertino in the same app? So my app uses Material on Android and Cupertino on iOS.
Yes.
And the short answer to that is
Mhm.
yes.
That's the whole point.
And you can tell which one it is. I think that, when we look back at stuff, there was I think it was Andrew that did the last I/O that was in person. Andrew did a talk on making stuff work Cupertino wise. But definitely you can always check and make that. And then many of some of the stuff happens automatically. Like for example, the dialogue, that shows correctly on iOS versus Android that Craig showed us earlier. But many things like slider, for example, have a dot adaptive, and that just automatically picks the right one depending on what it is. But not everything does, because not everything is exactly the same on how it does it. For example, we've got a Cupertino scaffold and the regular Material scaffold, and that's not real easy to make just an adaptive version of that. So
Because they
there's
work
enough
entirely
differences
differently,
how it
like
does.
they're different paradigms.
But if you wanted to go
So-
through the effort, you could actually in your code write it to do both, and it would still be in the same code base. So it's not not quite as bad. But that's, in a lot of ways, I would say that's not taking as much advantage of Flutter as we'd like to do.
There is people
You'd
that
have to
want.
do if statements for everything for the scaffolds, right? And
Yeah.
then-
So what you do is in your build method, you do if platform dot is iOS.
Right.
Right. And then you can return a widget for iOS, else for Android, or something
Right.
similar to that. You do is Android, return Android, that kind of stuff. But yeah, you can detect what platform you're on using the platform dot is, and then whatever the name of the platform is, Windows, Mac, Linux, whatever. And you can return different widgets. Now, some people I've seen have choose to do entire apps in Cupertino and entire apps in Android. They have the same back-end code, so they have the same database connection, everything else. Just the UI will be different, and it will be like an iOS style UI that's using the Cupertino widgets, and a material Android style UI for Android. But there's no reason like you can't just turn off the, like another thing you can do is turn off the inkwell, like splash effects, so that it feels more iOS than material, and do that and just have like somewhere in between. But a lot of apps just choose to have one design language for the app, and then they just use that on multiple platforms.
Yeah. And if
You
this
could really
gets
mess
a
with
little
the-
bit, I'm sorry. I was just going to say,
No,
if
go
it gets a little bit frustrating trying to figure it out, don't give up. I mean, this is just one of those things that takes working with it to really begin to understand the ins and outs. This isn't something that you're going to get in a week.
If you look up adaptive widgets, you'll find lots of resources talking about these same problems. These aren't new problems. These have been around. These aren't even problems. There's solutions about how you might go around doing it depending on your app, basically.
And it's also probably worth mentioning that Flutter is no longer just Android and iOS.
Yes.
So like
web.
Simon mentioned, we've got, it can be web, it can be Mac, it can be Windows, it can be Linux.
I know the desktop ones are currently in beta still, I think, running.
Yeah.
They're awesome.
You can still develop. You can still develop for them even if they're in beta.
Yes, but you have to follow the instructions to enable them and to use them. They don't magically appear.
There are two questions, actually, I believe, for Stef. There's one.
Can you say hi to everyone? Say hello. Okay.
And one more. There we go. How are the editions different?
So in the second edition, it's brought up to 2.5.1, I think. Definitely Flutter 2.5, and brought up to current Dart, and it has null safety. Also in the second edition, there's a new chapter that's not in this book. Oh, I haven't done it yet. Hold on. So if you don't have an idea of how the book, because you see it online, it's this thick. This is edition 1. So edition 2 is going to be a little bit thicker because it has a whole new chapter. And the new chapter 19 is on Firebase Firestore.
Okay.
And so
one
Yeah,
other
that's
pretty awesome.
Another beginner's question real quick. Can set state be used to build a much larger app? Can you? Yes.
Sure.
But should you? Let me think about it, thought about it. No.
Well, I mean, to build, as in like you set state to like rebuild the entire app. Is that what they're saying?
I would not. I'm even if it was just set state on all kinds of different pages.
I disagree with that.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, you would have to have
state,
everything.
If you have a much larger app, you should have a good granularity of how you've got your widgets.
Yeah.
And any widget can have set state if that's what's appropriate, or any stateful widget.
When it's
can have set
appropriate,
state
yes. But there's an awful lot of
And
times
so-
when your state management is spread across different parts of the app.
There's not enough info in that question to really get an accurate
Point.
answer. Let's be clear. Right.
Yeah.
However, I will mention everything to do with state management. You don't need any libraries. You don't need provider. Everything is actually built into Flutter. Like there's notifiers, there's state management, there's all this kind of stuff in there. However, the packages make it a lot simpler. So, pick and choose wherever you want to use.
Yeah. We've got a good question here.
All right, what are some common examples of when we need to interact with elements and render objects? That just smells like a Simon question.
I'm dying to answer this one.
Smiling. Come on, let's hear it.
So the simplest answer is when you have a layout that isn't provided by a widget that's already there. So if you want to have some very particular way of widgets interacting, instead of making like 100 different widgets that do this complicated thing with set state and all this, maybe you can just make a simple layout in your render object that just does what you need it to do. You avoid all that complication and you streamline your layout problem, and it optimizes your app as well. And there's less rebuilds, which also optimizes your app. So the choice normally is when you figure that you can't do something and you can't figure your head around using the current set of widgets. So go look up the widgets. There's a ton of them in the SDK. You can go api.flutter.dev and look up widget, and you'll find all the widget classes in there. If there's nothing that suits your current calls, then yeah, you want to do your own layout. Then that's when sort of elements and render objects come into play. But, yeah, there's some articles around it as well.
I would add that for a very long time, I never needed to do anything like that. Like you can make a great app and never dive into that.
Correct.
And you're fine. But there are.
Yeah, no, I was going to say that there's actually widgets that expose there's actually widgets in the frame that expose the functionality of render objects for specific things like custom paint. Literally, the job of custom paint is to expose the raw paint routine of a render object to the widget layer. So you can do whatever you want with that. And the same goes for custom single child layout and custom multi-child layout. Both of those two widgets do layout, and you give it a function from your widget layer to do it during the render layer. So anyway, we won't go into complexities right now.
But would you agree only do that when you have to do it?
Yes, of course. Yeah, there's no need to. You could build an entire app without these concepts, right? Yeah. But you can then come back to, I want to update my performance. I want to squeeze out some stuff. That's when you can start looking into this.
Yeah, that's as Sarah and Danielle were also saying. I mean, it's a rare thing. The whole idea of the widgets is so that there's a widget to do almost anything you want, unless you're doing something really weird, in which case your name is probably Simon.
That's not fair.
All right, do we have another question?
Yes, I have to scroll up to hide it and then scroll down to find the new one.
If you just click on the next question, it automatically hides the previous one.
Does it?
Yes.
I didn't want to risk them having like on top of each other.
No.
The fact that we didn't train Sarah showing up again.
Whoops.
Okay, sorry.
Your producer credentials are being revoked.
Right.
I'll re-earn them.
Okay, so does Flutter UI work the same way like Java, Kotlin, and Android Studio? I mean, like being able to drag and drop UI widgets. That would be cool. I think you're asking like how in Android, when you have a layout and you can just drag something and put it somewhere, which I know that like Adobe's has got a product that'll help you do that and stuff like that. Yeah, and I've got to say, I don't like it.
Flutter Flow.
There's Flutter Flow. There's several options out there. There's plugins also for Figma and other things that generate, but all they ever do is generate the code for you, right? The thing is, the reason why you need that kind of thing in Android is because the way the layout system works, right? It's of that imperative layout flow that you have from it's just a different mechanism. Declarative UI works differently, so you end up wanting to do it in code. It makes more sense to write it out by hand. And also with hot reload and hot restart, you just type it and it's there. It's as simple as drag and drop in that respect. So honestly,
what I didn't like about that in Android, I don't like about it here, is how it starts hard coding certain things that probably shouldn't be hard coded because it depends on the size of the screen and stuff.
Yeah. That's the other thing. You end up always having to go in and change things and do it by hand anyway. So it's great for beginners to kind of get started, but when you're actually building an app that you want to use on a wide range of devices, it ends up not being to your favor anyway.
So paying attention to all of this, we talk a lot about iOS and Android, and then we've mentioned that it's also on the web and the desktop like that. And Stef, I mean, since you're our Ray Widgets Flutter Apprentice representative here today, can you tell us why it doesn't talk more about that other stuff and why it's just focused on mobile?
So when we started writing the book, it took us about a year to get the first edition done. And at the time we were doing it, Flutter Web had not been launched. And then we'd already had our layouts and everything like that. Desktop is launched, being in stable and out there general use, my brain's farting there. Sorry, I can't think of the word.
I'm kind of curious. I want to answer a follow-up question now. Like, will we see a future version that has web and desktop?
Hold on. I have more to come. And so desktop is not included because it's still in beta. We don't want to write our book and have it change so much. Now, you may say, okay, well, now you've got edition 2. Now, let me give you a little story in case you weren't here last week. So we published edition 1 the beginning of June. As you notice, edition 2, which is what's free right now, you can still get to edition 1 if you have the Ray Wenderlich subscription or if you've bought the book. Now, one thing that's really nice is if you buy the book and you do the digital, so you have the EPUB, PDF, or you're subscribing, whenever we do the updates, you get those updates. Unfortunately, if you buy the print book, if you buy print book edition 1 and then you want 2, you are going to have to purchase that because it's not all part of the digital magic. Now, we do have plans for edition 3 to expand to the other platforms that Flutter deploys to. It's just all of a timing. The second edition happened really fast. Like, we did it in a month. Google came and said, hey, we want to do this great thing and make the book public for everybody for 3 months, and we need it done by X date. And we're just like, okay, here we go. And it was actually months before we had actually started planning on working on the second edition. So we do have further updates that we're doing. The second edition was bringing it up to the current version of Dart and Flutter and having null safety, because when we first launched, we didn't have time to go through and make sure everything worked with null safety, because a lot of the packages, there were packages that had not been made null safe. So that's the current state. And again, if you have one of the subscriptions, there's different level of subscriptions on raywenderlich.com. So you can get the professional. You have not just access to Flutter Apprentice, you have access to Dart Apprentice, all the iOS, any book that is on our platform, and any of our video series. So there's more to it from that, but you can also buy individual books as well. Did that answer your question, Simon? And the person, I can't remember who, I can because I see the name, but I'm not going to call him out right now. But anyway.
So do we have another question?
Okay. Sure.
Let's see if we can get through as many questions as we can before our time is up.
Mm-hmm. All right, so go ahead. Sorry, you can read it. You brought it up.
You're the host. I don't want to steal your thunder. Go on. Sorry.
From Dart's
actually, I answered that one in chat, but we can do it again. Sure.
Well, we should answer it here, though. Anyway, we've said just so that it's, people don't have to try to figure that out. So from Dart's perspective, can someone explain the whole line const home, open paren, open squiggly, key question mark, key, close squiggly, close paren, colon, super, open paren, key, colon, key, close paren,
okay.
Question mark.
You are not
Mercy, Uncle.
Mercy.
I like that she did that, because if someone's listening to it, she just made it accessible.
So,
I think the punctuation actually is important in this case. I wouldn't normally do that, but I think in this case, the punctuation is actually very important.
So let's break this down. So this is a constructor. It's called a constructor, and it's the first line in the home widget, probably.
Something very important for beginners. Const does not mean constructor. Don't get that confused. It means constant.
Yeah, we'll get to that. I want to break it down. Just break down what we see in this phrase, right? This whole line. So, first of all, it's a constructor, and that means the widget that's in, the class that's in, is called the same name. So the home function. This is a home function, and it's in a home class. That's what makes it the constructor, because it's named the same. Okay. Then the parentheses, the first set of parentheses specifies the parameters. That is the variables, the bits of data that you want to give to the home widget. And in this case, the squiggly brackets further inside that mean that these are named parameters, meaning they have to specify the name when you give the parameter in the place where you're creating the class, calling the constructor from. And then in this case, key is the type, that is the class type. And then the question mark means it's nullable. So this means you don't have to specify a key. It's optional to specify a key to this widget. And then the colon separates the constructor from the initializer. And super here is part of the initializer. Basically everything between the colon on the end and the semicolon at the end, which is missing from the example, it'd be before the two question marks. The question marks are just the question, so ignore those, right? It'd be after the colon is the initializer, and in this case it means super is the keyword that means call the super constructor. So in this case, if this was a class that extends stateful widget or stateless widget, it calls the constructor in stateful or stateless widget. And the key here is if you literally want to understand any of this, on Mac, I think it's command, and Windows it's control and click. If you command click or control click, depending on your platform, on any one of these terms, key, super, it will take you to the function. It will take you to the class, and there will be comments and documentation in the code that should help you explain it. But to really sort of go through this kind of level, there's a Dart language tour and there's a Dart language guide. So if you go to dart.dev, they have resources on there which explain the language and how these things are constructed. But again, practice. Try changing things, see what if it pops up with an error, red squiggly underline, oh, you've got a problem, you need to fix it, and sort of take it from there.
I want to add something to that.
Real quick? Oh, no, go ahead, Steph.
Oh, so if you're working on the projects that are in the book, we have lint rules put in place. So if you, for example, weren't going to have const in there, it will pop. You'll get a message up and suggesting that you put it in there. So there are other things that we did to help write strong code, and those can be found in all of the projects. We have that in there, and it's the analysis options.yaml.
Mm-hmm. That works well. All right, I want to kind of jump back a couple questions here. And
okay, I was just going to recap this real quick. But
well, okay, go ahead, Scott.
I was just going to say another way to phrase it. This is a constant constructor for a widget called home. The key is optional. It'll be named key. The super means that home is extending something. It could be extending stateless, stateful. It could be extending anything. The super is the call for that class's constructor, and that class also has a key. So you're passing in the key from here to that widget's key. The first super key means that's the key of the super class, and the second key matches the key from here, which is being provided to the super class. So,
and again, if you don't provide a key when you construct home, then it's just passing in null. It's passing it in, but it's passing it in as null. All right, I want to go back a question. And Steph, I was struck by when you talked about how quickly you put this book together. You and your cohorts at Ray Wendelet. It's perfect, right?
No, we are humans. We make mistakes. When you're on the website and there's you can go in, read the book and all that, there's a link in there to our forums, and there's an errata section. So if you find a mistake, post it in there and we will take a look at it, make sure that it is fixed if it needs to be fixed, or have clarification in there. So, we're all humans. Everybody makes a mistake. As much as I wanted the book to be perfect, we're not there. So if you find mistakes, please let us know and we can address those. And remember, we are human. Thank you, Danielle.
Of course, it's I thought I would mention that. Let's start trying to do the lightning round on the questions. So do we have more questions?
Sure. Here's one. How to trigger rebuild a future builder? Yes.
I'm guessing that they want to return multiple values, so they actually want a stream builder. You change your widget to a stream builder and use a stream.
There's a widget for that.
The future builder itself is going to retrigger by the fact that it's returned a future.
Yeah, basically you give it a future, and then once the future returns a value, that's it. It's done. You can rebuild that widget by giving it a different key. So you can give it a value key with a different name, but that's probably not what you're after. It sounds to me that you're probably after a stream builder, which returns a series of data as future events.
Yeah. That's
whenever you use those, be sure to dispose of them when you're done.
Yep.
Otherwise, you end up with big performance problems.
Yes. Good point. Here's another one. Why is setting state without using set state a bad practice if I want to avoid unnecessary rebuilds?
It's more about so
True. Yeah.
it's not exactly bad practice, but wait, the point here is if you change your state, you can change your state anytime. There's no problem. If your state doesn't involve the UI, there's no problem there, right? You can just change whatever you want, whenever you want. The point here is just to make sure that your UI is representative of your state. So it's always good practice to, when you update your state, to rebuild your UI that reflects that state. But yeah, I mean, again, it's not about changing one variable and always putting that variable in set state, right? It's about anything that might change and update the UI, right? Then you want to make sure it's inside set state.
Yes.
In fact, often you'll do a whole bunch of stuff that maybe in or out of set state, but then you can just call set state to cause the UI to rebuild. Because you'd rather not call set state multiple times in a row. You'd like to let it actually build.
And an interesting point here is set state takes a function. So just put everything that changes your state inside the function. Once the function finishes, it'll mark the widget as dirty and it'll rebuild the UI.
All right, let's keep it going. Come on.
Okay, there's not too many more, but here we go. Here's another good one. This can last forever.
What is the best architecture for Flutter? I'll let you read it. Sarah, go ahead. I thought you were pausing.
Yeah, we need to agree on this. Been using domain-driven design, and it's horrible how much boilerplate it creates.
So
does it? I haven't tried it.
Right, I'm just gonna cover something here, right? And you can choose whatever you want, right? Like, at the end of the day, what fits best for you? There's no best, right? There's best for your situation, your circumstance, right? And even then, you can have a mix of things. You have to make what's best for you. Try them out, see what works for you, right? That's the key. You're talking about boilerplate. You've got a lot of boilerplate because of the wrong design pattern for what you're trying to do, right? It's a bit like this. There's a thing called test-driven development, which is write your test first and then write in your app. This is in my humble opinion. It's good to practice to do that, right? But if you spend more than half your time writing the tests or more, and trying to come up before you even get going with the code, then what you've done is you've just made yourself your own worst enemy, right? Like, you haven't got to the point which you need to be. And it's the same with this, right? If you're going to the point where you're just wrapping everything domain-driven design because it's an architecture pattern, what you've not done is actually use the architecture pattern effectively in your application, right? So, yeah, there's no one pattern for everything.
And another interesting one that you might want to look at is, I don't know if it's so much an architecture pattern, but as far as a way of organizing, but packaging by feature.
Yeah,
I see a lot of people going towards that. And it's one way of organizing your app that can really help.
It helps, especially if you get multiple developers.
Yes.
And that was part of one of the questions we had on the forum just in the last week too. Sorry, Sarah.
Nice. I was just going to say, if you have a bigger app with lots of features and you want to make it easy for other people to get into the code, it's a lot more intuitive to be able to like search for feature A and see everything in feature A versus like, oh, I'm going to look at all of my adapters or whatever. So,
and
yes,
this is as opposed to something a lot of people were doing for a while, which is packaging by type. Packaging by type is if you have all of your pages, then all of your widgets that make up your pages and various things broken down. But if you have all the widgets for an entire app in one directory, then you've got a big jumble. Whereas packaging by feature, you're taking like your settings page, everything for your settings page.
Yeah.
Your home page all together.
I do both normally. So I have a features, each feature, and then inside each feature I'll have widgets or block or whatever it might be. Well, that's all about code organization, right? That's nothing to do with architecture. That's nothing to do with actually your code. It's just how you organize your project's files so you can find things effectively. Anyway.
I've sort of settled on the same thing as you, Simon, when it gets big enough. But it's also a personal taste. I'll be an example. I've written apps. I've written little apps for myself, and they're just 3 files. Yeah,
they're just in the lib directory. There's no need to have any big pattern of architecture, right?
Right. Our sample app isn't big enough to. Sorry.
I just something that's on this. block to feature based. But the thing is if you look at VGV's starter project, it's using block and it is organized by feature. So yeah, block actually by nature is pretty much organized by feature.
I mean, here's the thing, right? Stick with MVVM if it works for you. Why do you have to change? You don't have to change.
That's one thing
Absolutely.
that's great about Flutter is it's up to the developer how they want to do just about anything.
It's one of the interesting things that I've spoken about before. Like when it comes to resource management, like the way that you do that in iOS is a set thing, right? You have to use the resource packaging system. You have to do that. On Android, you have your whole res packaging and your qualifiers and your names, styles -v21, whatever it might be. And it's like, no, in Flutter, it's like, you organize your assets folder however you want, and you use them however you want. It gives you the freedom. And this is the interesting thing. It gives you the freedom of everything, not just the pixels on the screen, but how you organize your project, how you organize your files, everything. But this is the problem as well, in that it gives the beginners they get frozen with, how do I approach this? I don't know what to do because there's nothing set out. So the skeleton, you can do Flutter create skeleton, which gives you that kind of starting road into how you might do something. But yeah, at the end of the day, it's better to have the freedom than have to be locked into something, right?
Yeah. And Sarah, if you don't mind, I've got one question picked out that actually is a perfect match for what we're saying right now. If you may already say it.
Go for it. Yeah.
Too many ways to do simple things, but not an official standard way. I think that's called freedom.
Yes. With great power comes great responsibility.
Right. Will there be functional components of Flutter, or Flutter is strongly class-based? I think it's like, is this functional programming you're over I don't know. I think there's two questions here. One is like, are we going to get functional components, right? Are we going to get more functional programming paradigms? And Flutter has that kind of notion of being able to do that. There's no reason why you can't use functional paradigms within your project. Streams is a good example of doing that, and set up a pipeline with streams. There's also several packages out there that add. I think what we actually spoke about a week before, FP Dart, wasn't it? We actually have a Hump Day Q&A from about 4 weeks ago, I think it was. We're talking about functional programming and a package on there which gives you those capabilities. So you can certainly do that. I can't remember the second half of that question now. Let's go off the screen.
Sure. I think we've come for one more, so let's just do this last one. That's pretty good. Does Layout Builder adjust the size of widgets when the size of display will change?
It's nothing to do with Layout Builder. Your entire layout. So there's Layout Builder. Sorry, let me be clear. There's Layout Builder, the widget. We're not talking about. I hope you're not talking about that. The layouts in general will automatically resize and scale with the device. That's the whole purpose of one of the foundational parts of the layout system, right? We don't work with pixels. We work with logical pixels, they call, right? Or also called dips on Android. Same thing, logical pixels. And they've already been scaled to the device's DPI. So that means if the device has more pixels per inch, it will scale it. So the size of a button always remains physically the same size is the general approach. There's lots of talking on, if you just honestly look up Android or iOS documentation on scaling and layout, they all still apply. But yeah, it will just scale. I don't know if anyone has anything to add to that.
Sorry, I was scrolling and accidentally clicked a different comment. But that was a great
I was
answer.
wondering how that happened.
No, I was just looking for like one more quick question, but actually it's time. So
yeah, we are about time, and I definitely want to say that we've got Randall out in the he's been out in chat, and he's been all over answering people's questions. I know Scott was answering questions earlier.
Randall Schwartz, and he's usually out there doing the same thing on Stack Overflow.
Yeah,
and other communication mechanisms.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think that's it for this edition of the Flutter Apprentice Book Club. So
see you
thank
next
you all
week.
for being here.
Same time.
What are we covering next week?
Read chapters 5 and 6, and we're going to get even more advanced with widgets. So, yeah.
Absolutely.
More
Uh,
widgets.
Let me see here.
More
So
widgets.
I guess we can say bye.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming.
Bye bye.
See you next week. Bye.
Thanks for coming.